Hey, this is Bear.
And this is Elijah, her husband. Hi.
And we wanted to talk about spiritual relationships because with Valentine's Day coming up, I think it may be interesting to talk about that. So concretely, three things we want to cover. Number one is, what is a spiritual relationship and how may it be different from a non-spiritual one? Then we also want to give examples of how that's been for us. And lastly, we want to give you some concrete advice for, like either having that relationship, if you already have a relationship, how can you make it more the way you want it to be, or finding that partner if you don't yet have that in your life. So let's jump in. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on how spiritual relationships may be different from non-spiritual ones? And maybe we should clarify that spiritual could also just mean growth-oriented, right? That's maybe more accurate. So growth-oriented ones rather than...
Well, I think in a lot of relationships, we're just trying to get various needs met of belonging, of feeling loved, of loving, of connection. There's so many beautiful things that can be in relationships. And
getting someone to make the peanut butter sandwich.
Yes, division of labor. Also totally nice too.
At least when you're on the receiving end of it. But yeah.
Well, it's sometimes nice to be in service too.
That's true. Okay, I'll remind you of that. Anyway, let's go back to...
So I think one difference is that all these things are possible in relationships. I think the path you go about to get there is a bit different, and some of your assumptions going in are different. So for example, a spiritual or growth-oriented relationship, often you're more open to finding out where you're wrong or where the other person's seeing something about you that you're not seeing in yourself, like your so-called shadow or the parts of you that you don't want to, acknowledge, or your patterning. I mean, there's a lot of ways that having someone who knows us so well can both be like great for growing, and it can be so hard at times too.
Yeah, and that's probably why I think that growth-oriented is a much better term than spiritual, because one doesn't necessarily have to be spiritual to be growth-oriented. Not everybody who's spiritual is necessarily growth-oriented. So I think it's more about actually wanting to evolve as an individual. And Yeah,
I think also sometimes the tools that are available, like for example, one of us may say, oh, well, we're just going to go meditate for a bit, or do any number of, various, modalities that would not be conventional.
I think meditation is conventional nowadays.
Okay,
but anyway,
or we can go pretty far into woo-woo land. So
anyway, all right. So I hope that was that clarified a bit what we mean by spiritual relationships versus non-spiritual ones, or like growth-oriented ones, and how we think it's different. So I think there's more of a growth trajectory. And like you're more willing to maybe get some feedback on like areas where you could improve and evolve. Was that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. And shared values and some other things that maybe really different in terms of how you see the world and how you see yourself, and some of the things you're hoping to get from relationships may be more explicit and different than in conventional ones.
Yeah, so let's move on to number 2. How's that shown up in our lives?
Boy, how's it not showing up in our lives? So I think one thing that's pretty concretely different is how we're available to support each other, where we tend to do something called deep listening, quite a lot, where if one person is upset about something, now of course they're just listening, and they're trying to be a good listener, and I think that's pretty common. But when we're doing this deeper listening, I think we're often listening at different levels, and we're encouraging whatever is happening, and just giving space for it without judgment if we can, and with acceptance, and also seeing the part of you that's beyond whatever your current situation is.
Which is really nice when you're at the receiving end of it, and it's not so nice if you're trying to listen to the other person while you're annoyed about them. So
it can be really hard.
Yeah, so I think that's some of the ways I guess it's showing up in our lives.
Be another, do you think?
I mean, I think sometimes in some relationships, people kind of like think it's their partner's fault. And there's not this sort of like sense of, oh, like there's one common denominator in all my relationship challenges with all these different people, and that common denominator happens to be me. So I think at least like on a good day, I think we're aware of that.
Yeah, and I think and increasingly, I mean, there's more good days than not. What was that one? I think your parents were surprised that you were saying every year gets like a ton better for us, and she was like, oh, usually it's kind of like greatest after you get married, then it kind of descends after that, or something along those lines.
I think they said that it's pretty unusual to hear people say that, hey, it just gets better. It just gets better each year. And that's, by the way, why you should turn your phone on silent mode and in do not disturb mode.
Yeah, which I've been imperfection, trying. Sorry.
Yeah. All right. Okay, let's move on to tips. So if you also want to have a partner who doesn't put their phone on silent mode, but who is available for you to record a podcast, which is very sweet, what are some tips you have? Before we jump into the answer, we actually have an entire course on how to have an amazing relationship while being on a spiritual path. The link is below the video, so go check that out if it interests you. And now let's see what Elijah has to say.
Well, I think it's easiest to work on yourself first, and as you're growing and being open to things, the other person gets the benefits. So if you're in if you're single, you could, be even more explicit, or, have something like, there's websites where you can connect with people like that. But if you're in a relationship where you're wanting more of that and your partner isn't sure, you could just model like, hey, when I'm doing this, it's actually like really better for you. And like, look at this. So it kind of is a bit, enticing and welcoming, rather than like, you need to change now, which can be the exact opposite of welcoming and enticing.
All right. Why are you staring at me like that? The camera is there.
Well, I'm connected to you.
All right. So I think one simple tool that you can try, and this is actually from mediation, which is an alternative conflict dispute resolution. Sorry, my brain's not very functioning today. Alternative dispute resolution mechanism, I guess. So, and that's basically, you just let the other person talk for a set amount of time, and then you repeat what they said. And that can be really challenging, because oftentimes what we think we heard is not exactly what they said. So I think that's a good tool to try. So like, for instance, each person gets 2 minutes or 5 minutes, and during that time, all you can do as a listener is listen, and then you repeat back what you think is going on, the other person said, and then they can correct you if you didn't quite get it. And then afterwards, you get your 5 minutes. Trust me, it's much easier to be the person talking than listening. But I think that's a good...
Yeah, and you could also just try things out and just see how they go. And if they work for you, try it some more.
Yeah, so, yeah. So I guess that's sort of like our brief intro to spiritual or growth-oriented relationships, which is number one, what is it and how is it different from a non-growth-oriented one? How's it showing up in our lives? Mainly by being aware of our imperfections, and which is surprisingly easy, or maybe not surprisingly. And number three, then we gave you some advice on how to apply that in your own life. So if you're looking for a relationship, then there are places that are specifically where people like that tend to congregate more, and then if you already have a relationship and would like it to be more growth oriented one, you can try this listening model that we talked about for us. All right, so thanks for being with us. Thanks for listening to this. And if you like this, please leave us a comment below and just let us know how you think growth-oriented relationships are different from other ones. And I look forward to being with you in the next episode.